Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of When I Grew Up. On today's episode, I have Bill Wong with me, and he is somebody I actually met through a mutual friend. But Bill is here to tell me today what it's like to be an occupational therapist. Hey, Bill, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. How about you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
So before we start, actually, this is kind of unique. So I'm about 40 episodes into my podcast, and you're the first person that I actually don't know personally. So it's kind of exciting for me because I truly know nothing about you, and I get to ask you the questions that I ask everybody else, but I kind of already know the answers because I know them. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean.
Okay, so before we start, are you Dr. Bill? What do you prefer to be called?
So typically in a classroom, I prefer to be called Dr. Wong. The reason why is because I have received my post-professional clinical doctorate from USC in 2013. So I definitely have earned my doctorate. And speaking of that, so in occupational therapy, we definitely have a few kinds of doctorates. So one that is in recent years that has been going around, I guess because like a lot of programs, they are preparing themselves for possible mandate for the point of entry to be doctorates. So there are people who are entering the profession, coming out from graduate school with their doctorates, but their doctorates are the entry-level doctorates. And then there are people like me who may go to a post-professional doctorate program. So it's a master's and then it's optional. They may work for a while and then they will go back to school and their doctorate will be a post-professional. And then of course you also get the traditional PhD. So therefore we have three types of doctorates, at least in the US.
I see. Okay, so where do you fall in?
So as I mentioned before, I got my post-professional doctorate from USC in 2013.
Well, then Dr. Bill it is because you earned that title. And I mean, I know that you, how long is that doctorate program?
Okay, so I guess this is also a it depends kind of question.
Okay.
So like for people who are going for whether is the entry-level doctorate or the post-professional doctorate, commonly full-time would be 1 year on top of the master's, which is about 2.5 years.
Okay.
But at USC, because our program is very user-friendly per se, so we do allow people to attend the program part-time. In fact, I think some person I know, I think she is one of the field coordinators at USC. The time when she started and she ended, it was more than 10 years apart.
Oh, wow. But she did finish.
She did finish. I guess maybe because of family, with family, a lot of people have family, life happens.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's like some people just take their time to finish their doctorate.
Yeah,
If you get what I'm saying?
A doctorate is a doctorate, no matter how long it takes. Well, that's awesome. And congratulations for finishing yours because I know that must be a lot of work and I'm excited to learn more about that program in itself today. Can you tell me what it is that an occupational therapist does?
That's a good question. So it depends on the setting, of course. Again, it's the all depends setting. So right now I work in a geriatric setting. And of course, I just want to preface that as like we also have occupational therapy assistants as well. So I think that it is important to sort of break the two apart. I think so there are things that I do in common with occupational therapy assistants, but then there are also some roles that only an occupational therapist can do. So some things that I do in common with occupational therapy assistants is like, well, we work on like how they get dressed, how people get dressed, how help people go to the toilet, sometimes even like how to feed themselves, which can be like a lot of people taken for granted. But then like, let's say you suffer a stroke or maybe like some kind of other, you have a fall or something, it's like maybe it affects your function with your dominant hand. Then how do you know? What do you do, right? You may have to learn how to feed yourself with your non-dominant hand, and that can be a process in itself. The thing that sort of separate me apart in my setting is that I also do initial evaluations of the patients. So what I mean by that is like when they first come in to the nursing home facility, and they definitely have to be evaluated so that we can know where they are at the present, like, and then set some goals based on where they want to be in the future or where I think they should be in the future, so to speak. And then let's see what else. And then also like another thing is like, let's say in my setting, some people, they may like in the nursing home, the nurses may say is like, hey, this patient has declined so much, maybe you want to check them out to see if they can benefit from therapy.
Okay.
So we'll also do some clinical evaluations based on that, because like maybe indeed these patients, they may have declined a lot from a functional standpoint, and they definitely need the therapy services to get back to where they're supposed to be. For the most part, I would say that's probably. And then we also do a lot of weekly reports, which I know you may have heard a lot of people say it's like, oh, once you become a therapist, you may have to handle a lot of paperwork. So by paperwork, it's not only our daily documentation, but also like weekly progress notes and also discharge summaries. So we have to do a lot of that. Assistants, depending on the state, some states, assistants won't be allowed to complete the weekly progress notes in my setting.
Okay, I see. So, for people that aren't familiar with your career and what it is that you do, someone like me, so what so at what point would somebody see an occupational therapist? Like what kind of things would happen, or what kind of people see? Because for me, I guess I'm a little bit confused in the sense that, like, how is it different than like physical therapy if it is like kind of a rehabilitation process?
Good question. So I think to address your first question, it could be anywhere from 0 to 100 plus. The
Mm-hmm.
reason why I said zero, because there are occupational therapists who are occupational therapy practitioners who work in the NICU. So that is like the neonatal intensive care unit, right? So technically that would be the reason why I said zero, because there'll be some babies who need some services like this. And the NICU, the occupational therapists who are working in it, is definitely a very specialized field. And then I talk about 100 plus because sometimes I think there was one time recently I evaluated a patient who was 103 years old. So from an age range standpoint, it's basically the whole lifespan, so to speak. And then so what we do is we target function, so to speak.
Okay.
Yeah, so function, that's why I mentioned earlier about like feeding yourself, getting dressed, clean up after yourself, those kind of stuff. Those might seem very ordinary tasks, but for people who might have let's say in my setting, they fall at their home and stuff. There's like, hey, they may lose their balance, or that might affect their abilities to perform some of the common daily tasks that we taken for granted.
Okay, I see. Okay. Um, Next question is, oh, can you tell us where it is that you live?
I live in the East Los Angeles area in Monterey Park, California. So it is a neighborhood where there are a lot of Asian Americans in the neighborhood.
So, do you work in kind of you said you work in a geriatric setting. Are there a lot of Asian Americans that are under your care?
There definitely are some,
Okay.
especially around my neck of the woods. But given that, our caseload can vary from time to time. So I know that there is one nursing home near my house, maybe like a couple miles away. and pretty much all the patients are Chinese Americans.
I see. Okay. And so sorry, Dr. Bill. I actually did some Facebook stalking before I met you, and I saw that you're not only an occupational therapist, and you're saying that you um do some teaching as well. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
So I will elaborate on that. That's not a problem. So 2 years ago, I started teaching at Stanford University. So as an adjunct faculty, the reason why I did that was because, like, I like to teach, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to pursue it full time or not. So that was
Mm.
why I did an adjunct for the occupational therapy assistant program in its Los Angeles campus. Because Stanbridge, we have two campuses. We have one in Los Angeles, and then we have one in Orange County. So being that it's close to home, I thought it is a good opportunity to sort of get myself immersed, whether I like to teach or not.
Oh wow. So
And
is
then,
that so
so yeah, so basically, first year I taught like physical dysfunction lab. So it basically I'm teaching students basics to sort of prepare themselves for the first clinicals
okay.
for the occupational therapy assistant students. And then last year I transitioned over to the master's program, and I've been teaching the leadership and management course for the students. And leadership and management is people may think it's like, oh, there's nothing much. Why is it taught in the program? But I believe that's like everybody can be a leader.
Mm,
So whether in ways big or small. So and I also think that in these kind of classes, especially considering that I think it's like I'm teaching the future generations of tomorrow in terms of future generations of OT practitioners. So therefore, that was why I think it's like leadership is actually very important, because I know in my kind of setting sometimes it's like, who knows, maybe somebody is a year out in graduating, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, by the way, you just got promoted to be the director of rehab of a skilled nursing facility, you know or maybe
mhm.
a few years later, it's like, hey, you are running your own pediatric clinic, so to speak. So you definitely need those kind of skills as a foundation to prepare for your future.
That is amazing. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. That's super important for I feel like any career. So that's awesome. So how have you been enjoying it? Do you like teaching yet?
Actually, I think I do. I
Oh,
think the
good.
course that I'm given, I think is plays to my strengths more, because I think for me, I'm more passionate to talk about leadership. So it's like, I think a course like this, it actually fits me very well. And I realized this time too, is like, I have more room to exercise my creativity to sort of create content that are relevant to the student, but also is more fun and more application based for the students at the same time.
That's awesome. So I don't know if you've thought about this yet, but so for you in trying to go the teaching route, do you desire to like be a professor of OT students one day?
I think technically I already am. I'm
I
already there.
guess. I guess.
Technically I'm already there, but to transition to full time, I think definitely waiting for the right time to see if I earn the promotion.
Right. Thank you for your honesty on that question. um, so can you take me back to the very beginning, Dr. Bill, like when you decided you wanted to take this OT occupational therapist route, and did you always know that you wanted to do this?
Oh, I would say the answer is actually surprise. It's surprise to a lot of people is the answer was no. And I also mentioned that I think I told a lot of people that it took me 6 months to actually love OT once I got into the MSOT program that I was in at USC. So it took me 6 months, which was about 2 terms actually. Well,
Wow.
I know a lot of people find it surprising, but for me, I think it's not very surprising because the background I had before occupational therapy school was statistics.
Oh,
So therefore, the transition from a field that is very black and white to something that is very multidimensional, and then also from a field that's very concrete to something that's very abstract. Definitely, it was a transition in terms of mindset to actually get to love the field.
sure,
So
yeah.
yeah, right.
So like you studied statistics before studying occupational therapy?
That's correct.
Okay, so you did that in undergrad, I'm assuming?
That's correct.
Okay, so what in the world made you change to occupational therapy?
That's a good question because, like, I think it's like I would say a lot of time. I would say it's my parents had a lot to do with it because, like, I was unemployed for a year and a half, and
Mm,
then I think about a year into my unemployment, my parents have told me, "It's like Bill, you got to do something. You can't be unemployed like this." Where you're making no money,
mhm.
it's either you keep on looking to get a job or you gotta go to school. So we looked at a few programs first, and OT actually was not my first choice. It was actually, I would say, probably my third choice at that time. So the reason why I said that was because we thought of business school first, but business school first because we had the least amount of prerequisites to make up compared to the
Mm,
rest that we were considering. But then when I talked to GMAT, I don't know if you have anybody from business school or somebody from business. You probably may know what GMAT is already. If not, it is like sort of like the GRE for business school.
okay.
So I took the exam, but when I found out my score, I was like, well, probably I would not be going to a very good business school.
Oh no.
So yeah, so I was like, okay, that's out the window. And then I was thinking about going to seminary because, well, at the time, my parents and I, we were pretty involved in the church. And we were thinking, like, we know some of the so called preacher's kids, so to speak. And those preacher's kids, they either were fresh out of seminary or they were in seminary and they were about my age. But then we look at the job prospects. I was like, well, probably won't get a good return of my investment.
Oh.
And then, so then we thought about OT. And ironically, and this is like right now, this is not the advice I would like to give people when
Right.
they're applying for OT school per se. The reason why I said that was because we only had sites for one school, which was USC.
Mm,
So we actually decided like, hey, this is a solid job, good pay. And to find out more, my mom and I, we actually went to the orientation for USC for OT students. It was a 2 hour long orientation, but because my mom and I, we got lost. So we actually came to the orientation 1 hour late.
oh no.
But yeah, we did. But the part I heard during the orientation was like, oh, we need some more researchers in OT. And at that time, my mom was like, oh, it's like, hey, this is perfect for you. This is probably your niche. It's like you have a stats background. Maybe that's your niche in terms of using your stats knowledge to combine with what you can learn in OT. Because I would say for me growing up, since you talk about growing up, right? So growing up is like my arithmetic skills were very strong, but
Mm,
then I couldn't find a science to sort of marry my passion together.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that was when my parents thought like, hey, maybe you can be a researcher in OT. And I think when I applied for OT school in 2008 and I submitted my GRE score. So one thing that stood out in my application was that my quantitative score was perfect for GRE.
Okay.
So I think a lot of people who were in the admissions committee, they probably thought that I'll be the next researcher for OT because of the fact that I have a very strong math background.
I see.
Turned out it didn't exactly turn out that way, even though I'm coming towards that now in a very roundabout way. But it's like definitely not I'm not the occupational therapist that people was expecting when they first admitted me to OT school.
I see. Well, I mean, that's so interesting that kind of out of your own desire just to find a career that would work for you, you kind of landed on occupational therapy. Yet, so it took you 6 months, but did you finally come around to enjoy it and appreciate the career itself?
Yeah, I think I do. I think that's why I've been going around to different conferences across the globe. Definitely want to do the best I can to not only like see the world, but also try to learn as much about occupational therapy and, of course, our related field, occupational science, as much as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, speaking of that, I believe those kind of experiences, especially traveling internationally to acquire such knowledge, actually, it really came into play in my classroom because a lot of students, they were like, wow, you have been to international conferences in your career and you're not even 10 years in yet. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
that is amazing that you get to do that. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
we want to hear your story about getting involved in these kind of things.
Yeah, so what is that? I don't really know what that means and what that means as an occupational therapist, you going to international conferences. What does that mean? Like,
So for me, it's just like I like to share my knowledge because autism is my bread and butter,
I
So I was
see.
thinking it's like, hey, I want to, even though I know it sounds very strange because here I am working in a geriatric nursing home setting. But then when I go around conferences, I share my knowledge and my expertise about autism. I know that if people were to look at me on paper, they were like, how, shouldn't you share about like fall prevention? Shouldn't you share stuff that you might know about Alzheimer's, dementias, like what's going on,
Mm,
So, but then it's like, well, autism is very near and dear to me. So that's the reason why I chose to share that whenever I could, especially considering that, especially when I did my doctoral capstone. So my doctoral capstone was actually a course on autism.
oh,
And I hear a lot of people from the OT profession, they've been telling me that like, hey, your work, if you keep on building on it, it can have a lot of value. It's like
right.
no matter where you go in the world, it can have a lot of value because like a lot of people in terms of autism, people often share like their accounts or the perspective or the knowledge based on their clinical experiences. But then for you, it's like, hey, it's like on one hand, you are a clinician, just like the rest of us. But then it's like you also have the lived experiences piece that the rest of us, most of us, I would say the most of us don't have.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore it's like, hey, what you share and what you do, you should still develop that knowledge and experience and expertise because like that is gonna carry you for a long time in your career.
Mm, I see. I see. So, um, what is it that you wrote about in your what? Sorry, what did you call it?
So I guess you can say a dissertation, even though it's a
Oh yeah, your
capstone.
dissertation. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So basically, as for my OTD or the clinical doctorate degree, so I chose to develop a course on autism, so to speak. So I do not really teach that, but I use that as a foundation for many of my conference presentations that I've done afterwards. So therefore, it's like even though I develop a capstone or dissertation, even it just well, I guess it's like somehow it works out. It's like I use bits and pieces of it over time, if I can call it that, right?
Okay, so I think, Dr. Bill, I'm not really understanding what it is that you're saying because I think something is being lost in my knowledge of occupational therapy and what it is that you're saying. So, like, you're saying that you have an expertise in autism occupational therapy and or you have like knowledge that other people can't really share about or
Oh, so I guess it's the live experiences. So let me
okay.
define live experiences. So live experiences is somebody who actually had personal experiences with a disability.
Okay.
So therefore, I sort of tie in terms of that was actually what my dissertation was on. It's sort of like a course that was based on my personal experiences with the disability on top of what's out there in terms of autism literature. So it sort of blended those two together to put together as a course.
I see. Okay. What is your experience with this disability?
Well, the fact that I live with it every day, I think that that is I think that counts, right?
Wait, are you saying you're on the spectrum of autism?
That's correct.
W- Oh my gosh, I would never know. I would never know that you live with this disability because you are so articulate, and I think a lot of my experience with autism is not at this high level. And so I
Yes, and I
find it
think also a
extremely.
lot of people I think even like people in my own professional community, if they have seen what I've been doing, a lot of people were like, what the heck? Why is, how can Bill do this? How can Bill do that? It's like some of the things I do is almost like, dude, this is so demanding for him. Yet he's pulling it off.
That's amazing. That really is amazing. You've accomplished so much with a with a disability, and I had no idea. So thank you for sharing that part of your life with me. Um, so Dr. Bill, then could you kind of share with me your experience then? Like how has that been personally for you to work with people that have disabilities and need functional help, but you also being able to relate to them?
Actually, I'm going to go to the academia round because now it's like definitely I'm probably am more in tune in terms of students of their needs. I think it's like for some students, definitely I'm empathetic because like, hey, you know what? If they tell me it's like, hey, I have a disability, so it's like, hey, I have one too. So it's like
Mm.
definitely, I think I'm more empathetic in the field as a clinical instructor because like, hey, you know what? If you tell me up front before your first day or on your first day, it's like we'll problem solve to help you get you to where you want, where you should be.
Yes, yes. That's awesome. That's really amazing. I feel like for me, I'm telling people, when you grow up, you should be this or that, or you should discover and learn more about a specific career. But also, I love sharing people's stories, and I just feel honored that you would be able to share yours in this capacity today with me. So thank you so much once again. Um,
Yeah, I think you told me earlier, right? You told me earlier in the very beginning. It's like, well, you did 40 episodes of people that you know. This is the
yeah.
first time you are doing with somebody that you don't know. So
Yeah.
therefore, you really have to adjust on the fly based on what my responses are.
Yeah. How am I doing? Am I doing
Doing
okay?
good.
Okay, well, okay, so going back to your career in itself. So, um can you tell people that are maybe thinking about occupational therapy what it's a little bit like on the field, like working day to day with people that have disabilities or need therapy or rehab with their functioning? Like how, like what is it like? Like is it really hands on or
Definitely very hands-on, actually. Definitely
Mhm.
very hands-on because a lot of stuff that we may be working on, like for example, if they need help to get to the bathroom or they need help getting dressed, sometimes we might have to provide some kind of physical assistance. Of course, that depending on how well they do, of course. Or sometimes it's very hands-on because like if we're working on balance training or transfers, so we definitely work on those, like transfer from like a bed to a wheelchair or the wheelchair to the toilet. Definitely very hands-on because safety is number one, especially given its geriatric setting. We One of the rules that we have to go by in the geriatric setting is we have to assume everybody is of all risk.
Mhm. Yes.
So therefore,
Yes.
hands-on is definitely is a must. And then of course on the opposite side of the spectrum, there are people who are totally dependent, they're bedridden, and they may like their joints may be very stiff. So it also be hands-on as well because of the fact that we may have to do some stretching and some range of motion exercises. So therefore it's very hands-on,
I
so to
see.
speak.
Yes, yes. So, do you learn all of those tools and how to work with patients and things like that when you are in school?
We definitely get a lot of foundations of it because so I would say this. So when you are in an occupational therapy program or an occupational therapy assistant program, they are training you as a generalist. So definitely you have some foundational knowledge of each setting that you might go into.
Okay.
And then of course, when you take your continuing education courses after your career, that's when you sort of develop your specialty, so to speak.
I see. And so, how did you come about your specialty?
How did I come up with my specialty? So with I think my case is more the unique case because of the fact that I live of autism, so to speak. So
Mhm.
therefore, I actually do a lot of literature review because I submit a lot to conferences, and part of the process of submitting conferences is to ensure I have a lot of up-to-date knowledge of what's going on in research
Mm,
and autism literature in terms of peer-reviewed journals. So therefore, it's like as I'm learning more about from a literature standpoint, what literature are saying and going towards, that sort of actually helped build my knowledge base. And then I sort of integrate that as like, hey, like for example, like does this apply to me or does this not apply to me? So basically, it's like I'll read the literature and then sort of like, do I agree what the literature is saying? If I agree,
mm,
then it's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to present something, use my combined perspective. But if I don't agree, I might say, you know what? I may have to present on something that I do not agree with the literature.
I
So
see.
basically, it's like I do a lot of peer review, so to speak. That actually has helped me a lot.
Okay. So, since you are more on the research side of occupational therapy, um like what does that mean? So like, what are you research are you researching like different techniques or like I don't understand. Yeah, can you explain more about that?
Oh, so actually, let me backtrack a little bit.
Okay,
So,
okay.
yeah, so I think for me, I think as part of I think one question that you did not ask, but I think is very helpful to know is
Okay.
like, so for us, it's like, so when we get out of school, we are generalists, as I mentioned before,
Mhm.
but as part of the requirements of keeping our licenses, we definitely need to get continuing educational courses to continue our professional development. And
I
then
see.
part of the keeping of the licensure, we actually have to take courses that are relevant to the areas that we are practicing in, so to speak. So my case is a little bit different than say your traditional OT practitioner because so I definitely take my share of continuing education courses related to geriatrics, related to neuroscience. So I had to take that because that's what my clinical populations are. So the autism stuff, I actually study on my own.
I
I
see.
actually do some reading of peer review articles on my own so that I can have some up to date knowledge, so to speak.
Okay. I see. I understand now. Um, so can you talk a little bit about the licensure that you were talking about? Like, so after you graduate occupational therapy school, um, you have to get licensing and certification, I'm assuming, like you mentioned. And now is that like a very like is that only one test and you get licensed or how does that work?
So definitely as part of the requirement is of course complete the coursework, you pass it, and then also the clinicals, you pass them, then you can take the exam. So it's one exam, but then is like at least in California, is we renew our license every 2 years, and then like a lot of people, especially in the job, is like they're also required to renew the national registration
Okay.
every. But so in terms of our state renewals, it depends on the state on what the requirements are because each state is very different.
I see. Okay. Well, that's good to know. So I guess, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, so it would probably be different than it is in California, I'm assuming.
Correct.
Okay. Well, okay, so after you get your licensing, as far as like job hunting goes, where do occupational therapists do they apply at rehabs or hospitals or what does that look like?
So that's a good question. So I would say it's like in terms of where to look for jobs, right? So sometimes maybe it's from the department alumni page, for
Mm.
example, or it could be through our state association boards. And of course, Indeed is also very popular as well.
So it's just as simple as that, really. Just like it's usually just a posting and people just look for it.
Yeah, correct.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome. That's good. That's good to know, I feel like. So as an occupational therapist, for me, I would feel like okay, say I'm just putting myself in a patient's shoes, right? Learning and like relearning a function or learning a function, and I feel like I would grow impatient with myself sometimes. Now, what is the patient to therapist relationship like when it comes to those types of frustrations?
Oh yeah, definitely can happen. I think it's not uncommon,
Uh-huh,
It
uh-huh.
can happen because like, hey, I want progress, I want progress. But sometimes I have to educate them, it's like, hey, like your mind is like you want to progress, but then it's like, hey, your body's not listening to you.
Yes,
Or maybe
yes.
like or yeah, your body's just not listening to you. Or sometimes of some kind of dysfunction, it can affect your ability, so to speak, to actually progress, so to speak. Like, for example,
Mm,
going back to, I would say like pediatrics, for example, right? I think a common one would be like getting kids to ride a bike.
right.
So definitely it can be very frustrating. Let's say
Mm,
after the first few treatment sessions, and it's like, oh, you got taught some basics to ride a bike, and then it's like after a few sessions, you still have not mastered it. It definitely
mm,
can be very frustrating
right. So how do you
sometimes.
handle that with patients?
I think definitely is a lot of reassurance, and sometimes it's like you're doing great or you're doing fine, or sometimes maybe we can sort of find out it's like maybe trying to make some adjustment here, adjustment
Mm,
there to hopefully get you to where you want to be. But then again, it's very case dependent.
right, right. Absolutely. Yes. Um, So, Dr. Bill, what do you enjoy most about being an occupational therapist?
That's a good question. So I think definitely seeing patients progress and then getting in my setting would be like rather than staying back at the nursing home, so to speak, is like if they can have a good discharge to go back home.
Mm,
Or in our case, it could be like even going to like an assisted living facility or an independent living facility, that's still a win because that is considered as a lower level of care,
okay.
so to speak. So the patients, they are successfully discharged to a lower level of care. That is definitely considered as a successful discharge.
So that's what you enjoy most, just seeing your patients like get where they want to be.
Yeah, of course, definitely.
Yeah, of course. That's awesome. And then, okay, now I have to ask you, we talked about what you enjoy the most, but what do you think is the thing you like least about your job?
I would say definitely is along with a lot of occupational therapists, paperwork.
Oh, okay, like the administrative part of things.
Let's see. I won't say it's administrative part of things because administrative part could be director of rehab, so that's
Uh-huh.
administrative. I think is like keeping up. Again, it's like keeping up to date about patient progress. It's like
Oh,
I had
okay, okay.
to give the to. I guess let's see. yeah, to write the reports on time in a timely manner. It's not like,
Mm.
oh, this report is due today and then it's completed 3 weeks later.
Right,
you
right.
know,
Yes.
that is definitely not something looking forward to. So like if I see like, oh, I have like 30 reports that are due, I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me, dude?
That's crazy. Yeah. I mean, and then you have so many patients to keep up with too, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. So it's almost like you have to treat the patients and then you have to do the paperwork to play catch up. Sometimes at least in my building, sometimes that's not easy because like let's say you have like a 200 bed facility or more, and there could be like 50, 60, 70, 80 patients on caseload. And then sometimes you're the only occupational therapist on staff. So therefore it's like, hey, you may have to do 10 reports a day. I'm like, oh my God, that's a
That
nightmare.
yeah, that sounds like a nightmare. I don't think I would like enjoy that part either.
Oh yeah, and then of course now I mean, like another part. I'll say now is the teaching part too. So teaching part, you may think it's just teach, but then it's like, you sometimes have to grade papers too, and you have definitely. I know that students are very anxious in the classroom environment. They definitely want to
Sure.
know where they stand. So I sort of gave myself like a 1 week turnaround with all the papers, and then it's like with 32 papers to grade.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so yeah, that would take me at least 8 hours to grade everything.
Oh
So
man,
that
that
is also that can also be a nightmare in itself.
yes, absolutely. I can't relate because I've never been there, but I can imagine it. I would not enjoy that at all. Um, you've done a lot of schooling to be an occupational therapist, and I'm curious that in that time, did you face like any maybe like personal obstacles or personal challenges? Was there ever a time where you were kind of like maybe this is not what I want to do, but you felt like it was too late? Do you understand what I'm asking you?
I definitely understand. I
Okay.
think that was what we talked about earlier about my life experiences
Mm.
because I found that out 10 years ago. So that was actually in between my first and second year of occupational therapy school.
You found what out?
So being autistic, actually.
Really? Please tell me this story. You have to tell me. Like
So
how did this come about?
So definitely when I was a student, I was struggling with my clinicals, but I did not know why.
Uh-huh.
I did not know why. So a lot of comments that I received was like poor eye contact, bad at reading social cues, time management was awful, like all these kind of things. And then I did not know why I was struggling like crazy for pretty much a year into graduate school. And then when I walked away from one of my clinicals, and by the way, it's like when I mentioned about walking away from a clinical, depending on the program, that means that I failed the clinical.
I see. Okay.
So therefore, I was like, knowing that I could not fail anymore. So I told my parents, it's like, hey, you know what? I need to find out why I was struggling. And it has been a year
Mm,
now that I was struggling like this. So my parents were like, hey, you got nothing to lose right now because like, hey, you just walked out of clinical, you failed it. Like, baby is like, you need to find out why. So they actually did, unlike a lot of Asian parents, in this instance, is like, hey, you know what? We want to be supportive of you to find out why first before we get mad at you.
okay.
Yeah, so I did a month later, and it sort of confirmed my suspicions. And I told my parents that they were not mad. They actually felt guilty in the
Mm,
first place because I told them I might have a hunch that I
mm.
was earlier, but they did not listen to me. So they felt that they contribute to the failure as well.
Oh, well, it's definitely not a failure to me. And if anything, I feel like your failure led to your success right now, definitely. Um,
Yeah, but I'm saying is like the failure is that in that situation is I couldn't fail anymore, so I was behind the eight ball, so to speak. So they felt that they were partly responsible for putting me in that situation.
I see. So you never felt this like growing up, like when you were younger, like in your high school or middle school years?
Little bit, the eye contact issue. I definitely was aware for it for a very long time, but
Mm,
the social cues part, in terms of reading it, that I definitely was not aware of it.
I see. That's so interesting. So you had to take a test then? I don't really know how that works.
Yeah, that's definitely it's definitely a bunch of tests. So I go through like a screening, and then after screening, then actually I went for a formal assessment, as they say, right? So definitely was very lucky because I had insurance for my school.
Uh-huh,
So
uh-huh.
typically people had to wait a year for the diagnosis. For me, I was able to get it within a month, which
Why
is
do they
very
have to wait
fast.
so long?
I think it's just that a lot of people they want to get themselves tested, and there's a long wait list a lot of
Oh,
times.
really? That's so interesting and fascinating to me. I'd feel like that's information that one would want to know right away, but but I guess. Okay, so after you found this out about yourself, did that kind of shift the way you studied, the way you went about clinicals, the way you worked and things like that?
Well, that's a good question. I think talk about the obstacle piece, right?
Yes.
So when I found out, knowing that I had nothing much to lose, I disclosed to my faculty. And I think for yeah, I mean like they were very supportive from I always how to say this from a support standpoint, but there was one thing that they couldn't provide me, which was like introducing me someone in OT who also is autistic, so to speak. Yeah, it took
Mm.
me a year to I actually went it on Facebook one day, and then there was a caregiver from the UK. She commented on my status and saying, "Hey, talk to this guy from the UK. He's autistic, and he is licensed in the UK for 3 years now. You may want to reach out to him to see if he can give you some suggestions on how to navigate through field work or the clinical, so to
Wow.
speak." Yeah. So that took me a year. So that I think but then I couldn't really blame my faculty because like
Mm.
before that time is like the autistic OT practitioners, they generally were not very open about their diagnosis. So it's definitely not easy to find somebody like that.
Sure, yeah. So, were you able to reach out to this person in the UK then?
Yeah, I did. I did. And I think that actually talking to him actually got a lot of reassurance because like when I found out where he was as a student, I was like, dude, I was relatively similar to him in a sense.
Mm,
So that
yeah.
actually helped in terms of like, hey, actually I was on the right track, I just might need a little more support and somebody to actually walk me through. It's like, hey, you know what? You can do this.
Mm, yeah.
So talking to him is like definitely is a very good visual to say, hey, I can do this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. I mean, that kind of support network I feel like would be extremely important. I applaud you because, you know, I'm sure it would have been easy to just, especially without feeling the support system for your future, but then having to navigate it anyways, that takes some drive to do that, and I think that's amazing for any person. For any person, it does. So, yeah, that's
Yeah, I
awesome.
agree. And I think for me, it's like maybe because like when I was a student, so definitely I had some struggles before, even in undergrad. And
Sure.
then I sort of realized it's like, you know what? I sort of use a sports mentality to get myself through this because I was thinking like I watch a lot of baseball.
Yeah.
And then like I was like, dude, I sort of used this analogy for the situation. I was like, well, I think like if I sort of I guess to imagine myself like a starting pitcher, so to speak. So I sort of thought it's like, well, it's like if I were somebody who might give up a lot of runs, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
so definitely I need a very strong offense to help me in terms of winning a ball game, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
ball game at this time is like, you know what? I want to be an occupational therapist. So having
Mm.
a sports mentality so to help me because like, you know what? Definitely want to give myself as much margin for error as possible.
Yes.
Definitely want to be like, hey, you know what? I want to make sure I am extra prepared, especially given at that situation, at the found my diagnosis was I could not afford to fail. So if I were to fail, I need to go down swinging.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy and a great metaphor. I feel like I can relate to that. I love sports too, and so I understand that kind of mentality. But that's awesome that you were able to give yourself that picture and go for it. And anyone listening today, I mean, that's my goal with this podcast too, right? For people to make goals for themselves, even if it's difficult, to overcome them and just really push through. So, Dr. Bill, again, I just really appreciate you being here today to share your story and give us a little bit of more insight on the career of occupational therapy. We are kind of coming to a close and our time together, but usually before we end, I ask people, do you have any advice for anybody that is thinking about going into the career of OT and occupational therapy, or any advice at all, just in general, that you want to share with us?
Oh yeah, I think you touch on the point just when you close, right? So I think mentorship is definitely very important. And
Mm,
for me, I'm very fortunate to have mentors even right now to actually help me to at the times at this one hand they're supporting me, at the other hand they're challenging me at the same time. So having the mentorship actually really helped me in terms of maximizing my potential as not only an occupational therapist but also leader for the profession. And now of course I'm using the same lessons to actually mentor people who are asking me to be their mentor, you know. So I'm mentoring
mhm.
mentees using the very same lessons that I learned from my mentors.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great advice. I feel like mentorship is extremely important and people that have gone before you to kind of guide you where you need to be. Um, Anything else you wanted to share before we end today?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Okay, great. Thank you so much again. I really appreciate your time. Dr. Bill, if there's anybody that maybe has questions or is interested in your line of work, would you be open to chatting with them at all?
Sure. So
Awesome.
my Twitter handle is at BillWongOT. I would say that's probably my most active platform right now.
Okay, great. So you can reach out to Dr. Bill through Twitter. I will and if you missed that part, I can connect you guys. If you just DM me, I can get you connected with him. Thank you again, Dr. Bill. Thanks, guys, so much for listening. Until next time, bye.